First, I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar, Moving Beyond QuickBooks, the New Economics of Making a Change. Most companies start out on QuickBooks. However, many companies grow their top and bottom line without growing their systems. Legacy technology can slow you down, increase costs, and reduce company revenue and profitability. Many companies have remained on QuickBooks due to the cost of upgrading to the functionality that their company really needs. However, current advances in cloud computing and related technologies have changed the economics of upgrading from QuickBooks to more robust accounting and financial systems. The content of this webinar will focus on current and emerging trends in accounting and reporting systems for small and medium-sized businesses looking to move to upgrade from QuickBooks and other related systems. I would like to thank our sponsors, NetSuite and Host Analytics, whose commitments to thought leadership helped make this event possible today and delivered at no cost, like everything on Performative. A quick note on today's agenda. First, we'll hear a presentation from our featured speaker, Tom Kelly, and then conclude with an interactive Q&A discussion, which I will moderate, where we will spend the remainder of our hour. We would like this to be an interactive experience for you, so if you have any questions at any time, please go to the questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel and send us your questions. We can't promise to get all of them in, but we'll do our best and we'll follow up afterwards on any questions we did not get to during the webinar. Before we get started, a few logistical notes. We will have the presentation posted on the Performative site where it will be freely available. We will send you to link to the deck as well. I believe the presentation has already been posted this morning. For those of you who would like CPE credits for today's webinar, you'll need to answer the polling questions we'll have during the event. If you have any questions on CPE credits, please contact Tanya Walsh at twalsh@performative.com. We will share that email address with you again later in the webinar. At the conclusion of the webinar, you'll be asked to take a short survey regarding the webinar, and we greatly appreciate your feedback regarding our event today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. A quick word about Performative. Performative is the largest and fastest growing online resource for senior level corporate finance, treasury, accounting, and related professionals. Performative offers a uniquely noise-free, unparalleled online peer network, direct subject matter expert advice, and features, resources, and events developed in direct collaboration with our constituency, all for free. Okay, let's get started by introducing our featured speaker for today's webinar. Tom Kelly is Managing Director, T. Edward Incorporated. Tom serves as a strategic partner and CFO, CIO for several unique companies. Portfolio companies include Cardia Health Systems and OnPoint Medical Diagnostics, organizations that were created by commercializing software intellectual property from leading healthcare institutions. Previously, Tom has held senior management positions with large publicly held companies like PepsiCo and Deluxe Corporation, as well as small cap and private held entities such as EvenX and PeopleNet Communications. He is a CPA with an MBA in finance from Fordham University and a BA in accounting from North Carolina State University. With that, it is my pleasure to hand the floor over to Tom Kelly. Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Ernie. So we're here today to talk about moving beyond QuickBooks and talking a little bit about the cloud and all that entails. So the question, I guess we can start out is this you, right? We have plenty of information. It's all over the place. It was in spreadsheets, QuickBooks reports, emails, but it wasn't integrated, right? So consolidating of this information can be tedious, takes a lot of hours, takes a lot of time and effort, and a lot of resources can be wasted on it. So kind of in a premise that that MO fits a lot of companies today, and I would say both large and small. You'd be surprised by how many companies are using QuickBooks out there or similar accounting packages that perhaps don't bring everything together into one platform. So let's talk about the never-ending applications journey. So you start with QuickBooks. You add Excel for analytics. You're downloading information back and forth between QuickBooks and Excel and vice versa. Then you want to get some CRM into the game. So you add ACT, which is not necessarily a robust CRM tool that you'd probably want to use. Add Goldmine or even Salesforce.com. You may build a homegrown website, and then you may need an upgrade in QuickBooks when you have to add more seats and more users. So the reason why you see those arrows going back and forth is this is repeated time and time again across the organization. In many aspects, it can be extremely resource intensive. not to mention, capital intensive as well.
Hairball. Oh, that is nasty.
So hopefully you're not worried out there. That wasn't me. I'm not having a heart attack here, but this drawing here is very much representative of what can go on out there in business. If you look at all the players around the table there, you've got accounting, warehousing, RevRec, Salesforce automation, support. You've got this cacophony of connections between these things. You may have even a business intelligence data warehouse tool sitting in the middle of this, and you're trying to get all this information to be consistent, most importantly, because when you do come to meetings, you don't want to spend your time arguing over whose information is right or wrong. You want to focus your time and effort on looking at the information, believing in the information that it's accurate, and then making decisions off of that so that your organization can operate in a very efficient and effective and streamlined manner. When you don't do that and you don't have the opportunity or the offering that brings these things together, believe me, the hairball concept here is spot on in terms of what's going on. And you can almost look at each one of these connections, and even beyond, the fact that you're trying to, put together data between different databases or different platforms, you could probably assign an individual to each one of those lines that are connecting one of the platforms to the next. So, this is not just a technology thing. It also comes down to a process and a people thing as well, in that if you're not going to be able to connect these things together, you can end up with a host of problems. And frankly, in many cases, what I've seen in the past is you can actually make the wrong decisions off of some of this information that you might view as accurate when it really, in fact, is not. So let's talk about some of the common frustrations that organizations have. And there's a gentleman that you see just popped up on the screen, and that's our friend, Mr. Pareto. And the Pareto concept, if you understand what it is, it's that this gentleman conducted surveys, and he found out that 80-20 observation held up in terms of when 80% of the effects come from 20% of the causes. And when you look at this chart here, the common frustrations that are shown by businesses include integration and business intelligence. So that's 77%. I'm an accountant, so I'm going to round up to 80, and my Pareto analysis holds true in that a lot of the activity is really focused on these two items, and that's where companies are having problems in terms of being able to get information that they can make actionable and act upon. But there are some other things, too, that you can run into where, the siloed systems, kind of going back to the hairball, each constituency has their own database and they believe in it, but there's kind of a battle that has to go on beyond that. And then there's some other things there that companies do tend to be frustrated with, whether it's global consolidations, data warehousing, or other. So where are the opportunities that companies are saying they can improve? Well, no surprise, business intelligence, 32%. Ease of use and manufacturing inventory are extremely important too, in that when you do put a system in, you want to make sure that it's easy to use for an individual and an organization, such that the training regimen is not too complicated or takes such a long time that the organization can't get up and running quickly on this information on an application that actually is going to bring them the insight in terms of what's going on in the business. Again, not just from a financial standpoint, but from your operational standpoint as well. So let's talk about some of the top 10 reasons to move to the cloud. There are many others, but one of the key things people should understand is, let the experts handle what they're doing, right? So you can have access to IT data in over 150 plus leading technology applications, but what's more important is that you can access that information anytime, anywhere, anyhow. So anyhow meaning whatever device you might have, you probably will be able to get access to the information. And as we all know, that is increasing dramatically, such that probably pretty soon we're going to be wearing the Google glasses, and we're going to be able to be sitting in a courtyard somewhere in Italy and being able to interact with the entire organization at the same time. Tier 4 data centers, let the experts, let the people that worry about the data handle it. I would argue that in many cases we probably have some very good IT folks out there, but in the long run, if your organization is a website selling stuff from a warehouse, if your organization is selling services, frankly speaking, it's kind of the old outsourcing and manufacturing. Well, this could be the outsourcing of IT, if you will, in that you want to give it to the experts and know that your data is going to be safe and secure, and that they're going to be, employing the latest and greatest techniques, technology, and security capabilities within their data centers. The cost effectiveness of the cloud, so you can, enjoy the monthly payments, if you will, pay as you go, and you can tend to eliminate the large CapEx expenditures that is associated with some of the heavy iron of putting together your own data center and building it and securing it and all the wonderful components that go along with that. I also mentioned about being able to work off of any device, so the ubiquitous nature of what's going on with smartphones, with pads, with notebooks, laptops, you name it. Pretty much you can work remotely as long as you have a high-speed internet connection wirelessly anywhere in the world. It's pretty incredible what you're able to do. When you think about your organization, I'd wonder how good they're at in terms of managing 24/7, 365, where if the system has gone down, in the old days, I guess the pager would go off. Hopefully today the smartphone is going off. But you don't just have one person or a couple people. You have a whole team of folks, hundreds in some cases in terms of the size of these organizations and some of these cloud providers. The infrastructure is scalable, and it's scalable in both directions. So let's say you go out and you buy a lot of equipment and you put it in place, and things don't go as planned, and you need to contract the organization. Well, guess what? You own that hardware. You're not going to be able to reduce it in size. In the case of a cloud offering, you have the ability to scale down, reduce the number of users, or if things are going well, you can scale up. But then again, you don't have to buy more equipment, more iron, add more server space, whatever it might be. So it's important to know that the scalability of the cloud offerings are bidirectional. And I talk about break the software upgrade adventure. For those of you out there who have gone through an upgrade where we're going to be down for the weekend because we're upgrading to the next version of the software. And if you go back to the Hairball, you're maybe doing that more than one time. You come back in on Monday, and guess what? The upgrade's not done yet. It probably takes more than a week, and then there's some more problems. You have to go back and fix all the connections that have broken, hence on the Hairball that I explained. So the other thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of stuff that you can avoid by having a cloud provider take care of the upgrade and the software and the maintenance, and that when you turn your computer off on Friday and come back in on Monday, it's up and available for you with all the latest and greatest features. And guess what? All your connections, you don't have to worry about managing them because they're managed by the cloud provider. Another key thing is redundancy, failover protection, and what I would call the ultimate disaster recovery piece. The top cloud providers out there are going to have more than one data center. So if something would happen at one data center, it automatically switches to the other data center. Could be on a different part of the country, at another part of the world, and that now you don't have the issue of if there's a flood in your office, an earthquake, a fire, whatever it might be. It's not so much that now you can't access your data. You can actually continue to access your data and also not have it be wiped out, or you don't have to spend several days of trying to recompile and from a disaster recovery plan resetting up all the servers and all the information. Integration of front to back office processes. I can't stress this enough, and we can go back to the Hairball, but the ability to have everything on one platform, and knowing that if something in the front office, since somebody talks to a customer and they've handed them the check and that customer may be on credit hold, you can immediately take them off credit hold because you have that information in your hand. That person can interact with the system, and the front and back office are seamlessly communicating in real time. And ultimately, I guess, when you talk about going to the cloud, it's so you as an organization can focus on the core efforts, right? Focus on your business, focus on driving that business versus things like, what I would consider not necessarily value added to your customer base, and that would be IT maintenance. So let's talk a little bit about beyond core financials. So the opportunity to cash integration. So when you think about some of these cloud applications, they do a very good job of workflowing. So when you would get a bill, right, you can process that with more improved accuracy. You can almost technically automate the entire process. You can almost get rid of paper, if you will, if you digitize the invoice, if you digitize the check, if you leverage some of those check processing centers out there that work with many of these, world-class cloud providers. Procure-to-pay integration, eliminate spreadsheets and strengthen approvals. In that, if you have something like the vendor and you have a purchase order process, you have the opportunity in some of these applications to have the most locked down purchase order process to pay that you can imagine, or maybe your organization is a little more streamlined and you don't have to have a very stringent purchase order process. Point being is we're not logging things in spreadsheets, we're not matching bills. It's all done when you spread it out to the workforce because we're all connected on one platform, and they can do things like tick and tie, match, receive, and report with a PO, things of that nature, and it's all being captured real time, so you can streamline that process. Let's talk about self-service and T&E management. There's a lot of offerings out there today, Concur, Expense Cloud, Expensify, that have great applications where the user can interact with their smartphone or whatever, but you still need to integrate that with the system that you're working on. So the ability to have what I would call a front-end capturing mechanism, some of these travel and expense management pieces, actually improves the entire process, not only from the user standpoint, but from the back office standpoint of managing the workflow, making sure the approvals happen quickly, and making sure that check is processed or the direct deposit is processed via payroll. E-commerce to accounting, reducing the risk of fulfillment errors. Services to accounting, another thing to think about. So accurate project profitability and customer bill back. Being able to make sure that you have the insight in terms of what's happening on the services side with your clients, as well as the back office and accounting, making sure they're being very diligent in whether it's percentage of completion, getting out invoices in time so that you can get paid, things of that nature. And probably most importantly, talking about one view of the customer. We go back to the Hairball and all the different databases, the ability to have that information on one platform and having the visibility into that information in terms of this is consistent, there is one database, everybody's interacting with that database, information being real-time gives you an incredible 360-degree view of that customer from the front to the back office. Another thing you need to consider is make sure it'll grow with your business, and this goes back to the top 10 reasons I was just getting at about going to the cloud. You need to make sure and do your homework that if you're going to go into the cloud and you're going to embrace it, make sure that you're dealing with some of the top-notch vendors out there. Because the last thing you want to have is kind of similar with what happens with QuickBooks, organizations can tend to outgrow that. And the concern there would be is when you do this, if you can latch on to a cloud provider that can actually scale, so whether you have 10 users or 1,000 users, you want to make sure that the interaction with the system is going to be the same in terms of speed, in terms of accuracy, in terms of user experience, and that's going to be extremely important. So what you want to look for is being able to support multi-subsidiaries and multi-chart of accounts because, as businesses do grow, maybe there's more than, one division or one subsidiary. Country-specific tax and accounting regulations. What you probably want to make sure is that the offering you're going to look at is going to have the ability to eliminate the need to add, ERP for local support. What a lot of companies do these days is they have kind of the main parent or the large parent is going to have something like an SAP or an Oracle, and then they're going to put out there in the field other systems that are going to feed the larger system. So something you want to think about is you want to try to eliminate that. Going back to the comment about having everything on one platform and having information on a real-time basis. Sales tax, it's a big problem for a lot of companies. The ability to automate that process exists in several offerings. It's very important to look at that as you're making your selection so that you can calculate the sales tax across channels and geography, whether organizations have Nexus or whatever. But just keeping up to date on all those wonderful changes in the tax rates, whether it's a state, a city, a town, a municipality, is a pretty arduous task. So there's many applications out there that specialize in this that work well with suite offerings. Drill down from corporate to the subsidiary. So if you're sitting at the corporate parent and you have 10 subsidiaries, both domestically and internationally, you want to have the ability to drill down into that from a headquarters standpoint to see what's happening at the local level. And the point is, I don't want to make the comment that you're doing this all the time, but as we all know, there are certain things going on and certain things change by week, by month, by quarter, by year. You want to have the ability to drill down when you need to understand what's going on so that you can make effective decisions and be supportive to those entities. And suffice to say, the world is getting a lot smaller these days, so multi-language management, you want to ensure that you can actually have a solution that if you do have a subsidiary, let's say you acquire a company in China, you want to make sure that the folks in China, whether it's a manufacturing location, sales, or whatever, can interact with the system in their own language. So another important thing to consider. Evaluate the ongoing flexibility. So easy to integrate. So in this day and age, we have suppliers, partners, we have channel partners, vendors, etc. One of the things you also want to consider doing is you think about spreading, crowdsourcing, spreading the workflow out. It doesn't have to just be within the four walls of your organization. You may want to give the ability for a partner to interact with the system so that you can be getting real-time information from them, and then guess what? You don't have to spend the time internally inputting their information. They can interact directly with the system. Self-service analytics, reduce time spent in spreadsheets. Well, I think we've kind of belabored that quite a bit here, but suffice to say, we're all accountants, myself included, and Excel is a wonderful tool, but to some extent it can be like a drug where you kind of get hooked on it and you have to keep using it. If you take a step back sometimes and think about, do I want to catch a fish for somebody? I want to teach them how to fish. That's a pretty good adage here when you're looking at some of these applications, so that you can literally have those analytics happen and fall out of the process, so that you're not having to interact with it, cut and paste, download information, spin it around. Extremely important. The more self-service you can do, the more crowdsourcing you can do, the better. Workflow and approvals. Again, this goes everything from a travel and expense report to a purchase order to a quote, whatever it is that your organization wants to do. When you think about the workflow, it's in my estimation, it's an incredible waste of time if we're leveraging email, if we're walking papers back and forth from one desk to another. The ability to digitize the information so that anybody can pull it up and look at it, react to it, comment on it, approve it, reject it, whatever it might be. The more you can automate those workflow processes, the better off you're going to be. Think about PTO. I wonder how many companies out there on this call right now today have a PTO process where you have a sheet of paper, you fill out the information, you walk it over to your boss's desk, he or she hopefully approves it in a reasonable amount of time, gets it to HR, HR then technically either inputs it into the system or, dare I say, a spreadsheet. And suffice to say, from a pure financial standpoint, I would guarantee you the money lost for people, not actually tracking PTO correctly and overpaying for it is probably rampant out there. So that's just a little microcosm of, a pain point, if you will, that exists out there today that, many companies still do, both large and small. The other thing to think about is customization. So I talked about this earlier, the upgrades. One of the things you don't want to get into is what's called a version lock, right? So in the old world, the on-premise world, when you do an upgrade, sometimes you don't want to do that upgrade because you have all these wonderful connections to other systems. And I had alluded earlier about those connections breaking or not working the way you want them to do after you do the upgrade. So the difference with the cloud is, like I said, you can go home Friday, come back on Monday, and all the wonderful stuff is available. There's no connections, and you're on the latest. No connections that are broken, and you're on the latest and greatest version of the application. Plug-in ecosystem, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but reducing the risk of quickly outgrowing something. So organizations, sometimes grow very rapidly. You want to make sure you're going to have an application that's going to scale with the business so that you can take advantage of it and not have to worry about, from an IT standpoint, we need to go through a whole, platform retrofit, if you will, because our organization has doubled in the last 12 months. So let's talk a little bit about these different aspects. So we've on-premise, I've talked a little bit about that. You've got your heavy iron, you've got your own data center. There's the cloud, and then there's the accounting component in the suite. So let's talk about on-premise and accounting. There's an IT impact. We talked about, we're not having these things connected, so the customer is rather fragmented. Customer information is existing in several different databases. The processes, that's a key thing. They're very fragmented in that you're not basically interacting with one system and you're having to rely on information from other systems, etc. And there's very limited, if any, self-service at all. If you look at on-premise suites, there's a substantial IT impact, right? So if you're hosting this yourself, there's a lot of interaction with it, maintenance, upgrades, bug fixes, you name it. There's also a very large CapEx component to this, as you can imagine, because you're usually signing up for something, with a 3-year time frame. You're signing up for several users. Whether you're going to have to, use those users or not is dependent upon how the business grows. The processes, from a business standpoint, can be integrated, and there is an integrated customer, but the ongoing maintenance component, like I was just alluding to, can be pretty arduous for any organization. Now let's look at accounting in the cloud. All right, you have low IT resources requirements, right, because you're going to be having this dealt with a third-party provider. CapEx can be low because you're not expending a lot of time, effort, and money in setting up your own data center. But again, if it's not a suite, you have a fragmented customer and your processes are fragmented. So you can have several cloud applications and be in the same hairball situation that we showed earlier. And then finally, let's talk about cloud in the suite where everything is combined. The low IT resources is low. There's low CapEx, but in this case, the business processes and the customers are integrated, front to back office. So if you do it right, if you look at the right platform, you do your diligence, you can have a very, very cost-effective, efficient, nimbly running application that helps you run your business 24/7, 365, any device, anytime, anywhere. So this next page is how the cloud simplifies business processes in IT. And it's kind of blinking, but not blinking as fast as you want. But just there's a reason why I chose to present this in this way. When you look at across the top, we've got hardware, we've got desktop operating systems, server operating systems, databases, I should say, applications. And then down the left-hand side, you've got your financials, your CRM, your e-commerce. All of these things require things like a license, maintenance, patches when there's issues, replacing. In the case of a database, you need to tune it, you need to upgrade it. So the idea behind this is it can be very complicated, it can require a lot of resources, a lot of time and effort, and frankly speaking, if you can stay up to date on this, whether you're a small to mid-sized business, God bless you, but it is not by any means an easy task for anybody to take on and do well. So let's look at this first piece before we go to the next piece, and that is the cloud simplifies business processes in IT. So you have two people here. Last year we recognized that our processes were far too complex, so we put them into the cloud. Let the clouds make your life easier. I came across this cartoon several years ago, and it's kind of funny. You laugh at it. Nothing's that simple, but there's a little bit of reality to this cartoon. Granted, you don't get the cloud in the middle, i.e. a miracle happens, but you might be surprised if you adopt a certain cloud application and you require yourself maybe to focus on what that cloud application has to offer and not try to customize it too much. It's pretty impressive the way a lot of these offerings have great processes and workflow capabilities built into them kind of out of the box. And I would argue that in many companies, many cases, if you were just to adopt those and take a crawl, walk, run perspective, you'd be amazed at how much more efficient and how much more nimble your organization can operate if you leverage what's available and then take a phase 2 or phase 3 approach if there's certain things that your organization may need to do or may want to do or consider it to be a nice to have. So this came from the New York Times, where the United Nations said that more people have access to a cell phone than a clean toilet. And of course, only in America can we combine the clean toilet and cell phone. And as I said, you can work anywhere, anytime, any place. And I apologize to those out there that I've offended, but needless to say, we work anywhere, anytime these days, as sad as that may be. So on a serious note, what does it mean? people have access to these capabilities, these devices. The mobility, having the ability to have a distributed workforce, I can't stress this enough. You can have people all over the world communicating real time in different languages, and yet you're getting that information in your language. So the distributed workforce capability is really changing the way people work today. Outsourcing, the ability, we talk about cloud outsourcing, but you can outsource almost every aspect, not to market, but one of the things my company does is corporate governance. We use an application that's a cloud-based application, and we pretty much, can do that anywhere, anytime in the world. And at the same time, keeping all our different clients connected to what's going on with that corporate governance, whether it's a cap table, whether it's a stock certificate, whatever it is that you need, we're able to do that in a very decentralized and a very distributed and outsourcing way. Contingent workers. You think about Mother's Day, 1-800-Flowers. They hire a significant amount of people to deliver those flowers a little bit before and after Mother's Day. Well, there'd be no way they can probably do that if they didn't have this capability of being able to leverage the mobility capabilities within some of these offerings, not just the devices, but the applications themselves. And as I said before several times here, any device, right? So whether it's an iPad, an iPhone, an Android app, Galaxy Tab, you name it, a lot of these applications are ubiquitous or agnostic in terms of what they work on. So it's pretty incredible about how your workforce can leverage that information. And we talked about self-service here, and we talked about these capturing vehicles, and I mentioned, submitting a travel and expense report. Think about that for other things, even PTO, as I've mentioned. There's many very simple applications out there that can help your organization do this and integrate with that back office system, and enable you to, pretty much, make that experience an entirely self-service aspect where paper doesn't touch anybody's hands. And think about the visibility from anywhere here. This is probably very important. You can have dashboards that are real-time and role-based. So I joke with some people. I tell them you're going to be the CEO of accounts payable, and I want to make sure that your dashboard is everything you want to focus on for your day, that you have control over, that you can interact with, and that you're going to focus and get your job done. But when anything has to do with accounts payable, you're the chief executive officer of accounts payable. And it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's really true with what you can do with this information and how people need to interact with the system. And then finally, personalize the specific needs. You can do everything from, change the color of the user interface to put certain metrics up that you want to see. You can run the gamut as to what you want to do. More is less or less is more, whatever you think. So let's talk a little bit about leveraging the cloud. And this is, going to be a little bit generic, not necessarily QuickBooks, but let's talk about the cloud itself. And one of the things I get asked a lot is, what's the ROI or the total cost of ownership? And, it's interesting to me. If you go out there, and I'm going to show you a slide here coming up, if you go out to Google and just type in cloud ROI TCO, you're going to probably have about 50 calculators you can choose from. Pick the one that works for you and fill it out. You might be amazed. I have not, this is the truth, I have not been in a cloud transformation yet where the cost has been more than what is currently inherent within the organization. From people to processes to equipment, it has been a wash, or more times than not, it's more cost effective. But when you really get down to this, and this is the piece that I want people to get their heads around, yes, you want to save money, but you need to think about efficiency gains. One, I can't stress that enough. When you think about the PTO example I gave, being able to make your organization as efficient as possible from the most complicated process to the most simplistic process. It's about data improvement, accessibility, and accountability. We've talked about that a lot here today. The ability to access information when you need it is extremely paramount in this day and time. It's about headcount avoidance and realignment. So as your organization grows, the ability to not have to hire more heads is going to be extremely important. I would argue that if you had an IT infrastructure and your company doubles, you're going to have to hire more IT folks. So the point here is you can either hire the people that are going to actually add value to the organization in terms of driving the top line, or you can leverage the application that you put in place. It's about pain point relief. So I talked about PTO. Think about processing a check and what you folks do today if you're all accountants. And I'm going to get into a little rant about that at the end here, but just think about that paper process, everything from the initial purchase order to the check package, to the check run, to the check voucher, to the envelopes, stuff in the envelopes, et cetera, and I'll get into a little more detail. And it's about effectively and efficiently running a business. You know, we've talked about that, but if you have an IT infrastructure that is really holding you back and is not really the true enabler that IT could be because of the issues you have or the resource constraints you have, you really need to consider looking at the cloud, because small, medium, or large, you'd be amazed at what you can do in terms of improving efficiency of the cloud. And really, it's about focusing on what matters most. You know, most organizations, I would say that's the top and the bottom line in making sure you're maximizing both, right? So let's talk a little bit about busting some myths about the cloud. And I see those of you who are fans of Mythbusters, I kind of use this little thing as we're going to talk about the truth about cloud computing. So a lot of times I get asked about uptime. Well, you know, uptime, the system, yeah, you know, what if it goes down? Well, let me ask you a question, and maybe you can go back to your IT folks today and ask them for their metrics. And what I'd want to know is, you know, what's your uptime by application? So what's their email uptime? What's their ERP uptime or their CRM or whatever it is you have, your warehousing system? What's the uptime? And I'd be surprised if you're keeping those metrics, but if you are, think about that now. So if you look at this table here, we talk about, they talk about it in terms of nines in the cloud, you know, 9.9 to, or, you know, 2 nines to 5 nines. And if you look at the minutes, if you have 5.9 availability, that means you're down for 5.62 minutes. And this is in a given year. Or if you're at 2 nines, that means you're at 5,256 minutes, or about 87 hours, or a little bit over 3.5 days. Now, most solid cloud providers will provide in their contracts a 9.95 uptime. And what that means in days is you can have an unplanned outage of about 1.83 days, so almost 2 days. And sometimes when people look at this, oh, you know, I can't run my business, and what happens if I can't take an order and all this other stuff? Well, think about this, all right? That 1.83 days usually does not happen for an entire day. It may happen for an hour here, 15 minutes there. So the point I want to make to all of you out there, if you're really concerned about the cloud, really look at this chart and think about uptime. And I would argue that even your own internal metrics, even your own internal systems, I'd bet a lot of money on it that you've been down for about 1.83 days over a 365-day period. I'd be willing to bet that, and in many cases, I bet it's actually a lot more. So I really do believe this is a big myth. And then finally, one thing I do want to point out, the world watches this stuff. I don't know how many times you've seen that there's a major article about Google Apps is down or Salesforce is down. So you're getting information real time, so you're not even having to watch it, quite frankly. So that's the other thing to consider. And when those things are down, they're not down for days on end. It's usually a couple hours here or there is what you read about. So believe me, I mean, downtime, nobody likes it, but in reality, let's be comparative and realistic about what we currently have today and what really happens out there with the cloud. The next thing is the data security myth, and this is something that I've kind of gone back and forth on with people, but it really is a two-way street. And what I mean by that is that for those of you who are out there in healthcare, have you ever heard of HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Privacy Portability Act? And what it really means is companies that deal with medical information have to protect that information. I will tell you that the problem 99.9% of the time is not because the application isn't compliant with HIPAA or isn't secure enough. The problem is when people are sending emails with patient data in them, or they have a yellow sticky attached to their computer with patient information on it, or in the case of credit card information. What's really interesting to me is it's more human than technical, and the processes you put in place need to be rock solid, not just the application itself, but how you interact with that application. So the other thing to keep in mind here too is when you think about security, most top-notch cloud providers will have over 20% of their workforce, if not more, just dedicated to security, day in and day out, every minute of every day of every year. That is pretty profound in this day and age. And I'll tell you, as much as we might think we're locked down in our own little data center, that's not always the case. Next is there's a difficult learning curve myth. And this is what I found in many of the situations I've been in. When you look at, going through a big event, you have productivity axis on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. You have the status quo, then you do this change, there's major chaos, and that normal learning curve takes a little bit more time. What I found with the cloud, frankly, is that learning curve is a lot quicker, and you reach the new status quo a lot faster. What I say about that is, and I can't see a raise of hands, but I can't imagine many of you out there have not gone to Amazon, have not gone to iTunes, have not placed an order on the web. You'd be amazed at how intuitive the user interface of many of these applications are. And if you do limit it to what the people need to focus on, that learning curve is very, very quick in the cloud world. Next is the scalability myth, and I talked about this a little bit, but let's think about it in a different way. Single tenant is isolated. Think about it as a house. When you have an on-premise system, it is literally a house. You're spending your resources on individual maintenance and system changes. It's a business model that's based on upgrades. And the largest installs pale in comparison to the cloud-based providers. And what I mean by that is people think about scalability, and I'm a company that has 1,000 users. Well, in reality, a lot of these cloud-based providers have 50 companies with 1,000 users, and they're all running on their data center. So suffice to say, I'd be very hard-pressed to find a company out there that has as many users in their data center that some of these cloud providers have. And when you think about the cloud, think about an apartment building. It's multi-tenant, it's shared, right? So you're spending resources more on innovation than worrying about the infrastructure. The business model, and this is pretty important to know, is based on customer success, meaning if the people aren't using it, if there's not adoption, you're not going to renew it. It's a service. They have to do a good job, and they have to make sure that they win you over every day. In some applications like NetSuite, never mind. So let's talk about the real cost myth. And this is just a smattering of some of the ROI TCO calculators that are out there. I pulled this down several months ago. I'm sure there's some latest and greatest ones out there. But my comment to you folks is don't recreate the wheel. You can probably get a wonderful calculator out there and start plugging your information in and get some great information back in terms of what the real cost of going to the cloud is versus staying with on-premise. So let's talk about finance and what the cloud really enables finance to do. And the first point I want to make is think about a distributed finance organization. I say think NASA. For those of you who saw Apollo 13, think about the ability to be able to give information to people real time anywhere that's accurate. And it's almost what you can do with applications in the cloud, because you have that information. Maybe your Salesforce person isn't that comfortable using technology. You actually have the ability to give him or her the real information they need the second they call. Not, I'll get back to you with an Excel spreadsheet. You have that ability right then and now. And even you have the ability to even be proactive and send them information. Let's say that you're getting alerts sent to you on. So that's extremely important. It really almost makes a finance organization like mission control. Think about SAS 70 Type 2 compliance. You can actually leverage the infrastructure of these cloud providers. Like I said, the top cloud providers, they are SAS 70 Type 2 compliant. So why spend all that money internally trying to get your own infrastructure SAS 70 Type 2 compliant? Why recreate the wheel? Now let's talk about automating end-to-end business processes, checks. And if you will indulge me, let's think about the check process that exists today in most organizations. You do the PO gets approved. The PO then goes into a file. The receipt comes in, the shipment comes in, then you compare the receiving document to the PO. To staple it together, you put it in a file. You take that from the file, you go and you put it together, you enter it into the system. Now it's ready to be paid. Now you've got a check package, if you will, those papers stapled together. You take that information, you put it into the system, you generate the check run, you take the check run, you put that on the CFO's desk, you bring all the check vouchers, which is probably like a foot high, and the CFO goes through all this stuff, say, okay, yeah, these are okay to pay. He or she sends the information back to the person. That person then takes that information, refiles the check vouchers, takes that check run, then goes and generates a check. They bring the checks back to the CFO's desk. The CFO then goes through all those checks and assigns the checks, and then it gets to one or two, and gee, I can't remember this. Tells the person, you go pull the check vouchers and these things again. Okay, great. So the CFO then looks at this, oh, yeah, I should have signed that. They sign it. They give it back to that person. The person refiles the check vouchers, then takes those checks, takes them over to somebody else, and says, okay, here, these checks are ready to go. They, rip off the checks, they put it in an envelope, they run it through the postage system, then they take those check stubs, they go back and they staple it to all the check vouchers, put it in, and then finally you get to mail that stuff out. Now, that is the most archaic thing I think I've ever experienced, and I'll bet Many of the companies out there today talking or listening to me talk here today do that. With opportunities that you have in the cloud, you can literally automate that entire process, right? So you workflow out the ability to do the PO, do the receiving. It automatically matches it. You digitize the invoices and the details so that the CFO can go in and just look at the information. Then you literally can go in and click off buttons when the checks are ready to be paid, and you can work with check processing organizations where it's lights out. And literally, they will print the check and they will mail the check. You don't have to order checks. You don't have to order envelopes. I will tell you right now, and what I do in my business, I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have that capability with these cloud-based providers and what they do. So sorry about that rant, but nonetheless, it's a reality. More tightly integrated analytics. So we've talked about this before, but the ability to have everything on one platform so that we're not arguing about whose information is right and wrong. The automatic upgrades, you eliminate that wasted maintenance time, and you can reallocate the IT budget from what I would consider a maintenance organization to what I would coin controller of the user experience. In my estimation, IT should be doing the best they can to make that user experience the best that anybody's ever had. So some general tips for success, and these are not necessarily cloud. This is just good common sense. Assign a cross-functional team for doing a selection and the implementation. Assign the business benefit goals and measures. So in other words, when you do the ROI TCO analysis and you're looking at efficiencies, make sure that you revisit that and you're actually getting the savings or the efficiency improvements that you expected. You can broaden the ERP usage across the business and department, so it's not just an accounting package. The entire organization is interacting with this. It'll ensure you'll get clear visibility into ERP data. So meaning that if you have everything on one platform and that information is real time and people are interacting with the system, that information is pretty much going to be accurate and visibility is going to be 100% across the organization. And ultimately plan for a distributed mobile organization. You know, why does everybody have to be sitting at their desk to be quote-unquote working? I've found in this day and age, the term work shifting, if you will, I tend to work 24/7, I guess. You know, I'm not working 24 every hour every day, but I don't look at my work day as 9 to 5. I can work 3 to 4 hours now, take a break, work 3 to 4 hours later, work 3 to 4 hours at night. It's very interesting about how effective that makes me as an individual, and it makes my team effective as well.
Tom, thank you very much for that outstanding content, and I want to applaud you for getting through that whole accounts payable process without stumbling one time. That's very impressive. At this point, we're going to launch our polling questions. We'd appreciate your everyone's participation in the polling questions. Please note that for those of you in the audience today who have CPE credit today, you will need to answer both of our polling questions. Again, if you have any questions you would like us to have answered by Tom, please ask it via the Go-To Questions area in your GoToWebinar control panel. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and start the Q&A with Tom while the polling questions are open. So Tom, our first question is around, you covered, something around, how the economics might make sense. Can you give us a little bit more depth on that? So in general terms, for someone looking for an upgrade prior to the cloud, what are the things that are really changing the economics and access to small and medium-sized businesses to the cloud?
Well, from an upgrade standpoint, I want to talk about a little more generic terms, if you will. And what I mean by that is you're going to have resources and individuals that are, involved in that upgrade process. So that's, one thing you need to consider. It's going to take time away from, what they probably need to really be focusing on. Other things to consider when you do an upgrade, many times I was in an experience once where we had to upgrade the email system for Microsoft Exchange. And because we were going from one version to another, we had to not only upgrade software, we had to buy a new server, which usually comes with that, and we had to buy more licenses and new licenses. So when you're doing some of these upgrades, you really need to do the details in terms of what's really happening. Some of the providers may change, and when they do an upgrade, they actually make you bump up to another level in terms of number of users you need to sign up for. The other thing is maintenance. The levels of maintenance that you do sign up for, you need to consider those as well, because some companies may charge different levels of maintenance, and what's included in those maintenance agreements can be very different, even within the same organization. I think the other things you need to consider is just thinking about that, the hardware and the CapEx expenditures that are associated with it. And then the other thing you also need to consider is sometimes, depending upon bandwidth and other things, you actually may end up having to spend more money on just your connections to the internet, your T1 lines, in terms of what's going to be coming in and out via the traffic. So there's a lot of things that you can, drill down on. The thing that you need to consider, though, is the high-level ones I've talked about, headcount, et cetera. What you're going to find is some of the things are very consistent across organizations, but some things can be very unique to organizations as well. So as you do your diligence, make sure you're considering, not only how you compare to other organizations, but what's unique to you as a company as well.
Okay, great. Can you speak a little bit? Someone's asking a question around the implementation time that you would expect from, upgrading from to a cloud solution as opposed to a more of an on-premise solution?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I've done a lot of these things now, and what I've found, and I've done a lot of them both in the early days on-premise, SAP, Oracle, et cetera, current day, NetSuite, Intacct, Workday, et cetera. What I find is there's a mindset in there. What I call it is the on-premise mindset versus the cloud mindset, and it's simply this. When you have an on-premise application, what I've usually found is you have to make sure you have locked it down before you flip that switch, meaning if you didn't get something 100% right, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because now you're going to have to, reconfigure it. You're probably going to have to bring the system down. It doesn't work very seamlessly. The comparison to cloud applications is the term I would call it is configuration. In other words, we're only going to give you a certain amount of ways that you can configure the product. Now, to digress a second, they allow you to customize it, but that's coding, and I would argue against that when you're starting to do that. But when you do go live on a cloud application, let's say you configured the purchase order process like I just talked about earlier, and you want to have, for whatever reason, 10 people approval level in that purchase order process. You think it's the greatest idea you've ever had, and you go live, and you find out that, oh boy, this is just not working. Well, you're configuring a system. You have the ability to go back in and switch off certain things. So now, maybe instead of a 10-person approval process, you just make it a 2-person approval process. So when you're doing a cloud-based implementation, you want to get it right. Our friend Pareto, I would say 80-20 is good. But as you start using the system, you may find you want to interact with it differently. And when these cloud applications, they allow you to do that, much more flexibly than you do with many of the on-premise applications out there.
Okay, I just wanted to get your thoughts, what you thought on that, on the results from the polling question here, on the biggest frustration that people are facing here.
Lack of functionality to support growing business complexity. Accounting processes involve multiple complicated spreadsheets. Too much time spent cleaning, aggregating data for reporting, other. Okay, so let's talk about the lack of functionality to support a growing business complexity. Again, I think if you do your diligence, many of these cloud applications can probably solve a lot of your problems. That being said, if there is a very, very urgent need to, let's say, customize a component of what your business does, many of these applications allow you to customize the product, so you're coding it. The difference being here is now that you've coded it, you're coding it on their platform in their language. So when they do an upgrade, you don't have that break. In other words, they're going to make sure that that works in the current version and the next version. And they even, many times, will give you the opportunity to go in there and test it, so that when they flip the switch, you're absolutely 100% sure that it's not broken. Now, knock wood, I have never had a situation yet where the customizations that I've done, when an upgrade occurs, that it breaks or there's a problem with it. And that's the honest to God truth. And I've been doing this for over 7 years. The accounting processes and multiple complicated spreadsheets, I think we talked about that a lot. And this kind of goes with the reporting, too. One of the nice things about a lot of these cloud applications is they have great report writers. For those of you out there that have to hire a Crystal Reports expert to write a report when you want something done differently, what these cloud applications allow you to do is literally configure a report, kind of look at it and say, yeah, that's what I want or it's not what I want. And even to the point where you can make it a customized report and save it so that anybody can have it at any point in time. Now that being said, and I'm going to be a little flip-flopping here, you do in many of these cloud applications have the ability to download something in Excel if you want to spin it, if you want to put some perspective to it. So there's a great connection in that regard too. But I would argue, again, 80-20. I think you can solve 80% of your reporting problems with these applications. Many companies, what I do, just to digress for a second, we literally have a dashboard that's called the Board of Directors dashboard. And they have access to it so that when we go to board meetings, we're not spending time, presenting everything, going over the numbers. They're looking at the numbers. They're coming up with questions before the meeting that usually can be answered before the meeting, such that when the board does sit down, you're really kind of focusing and talking about the things that are going to be most important to the business. Okay, not are the numbers right? I don't understand what this number means. You can pretty much do that through some of these applications. And I talked about self-service. Well, you believe it or not, you can have the board almost be self-service, kind of like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn painting the fence, if you will.
Okay, great. We have time for one more question. So someone is asking to really dial this down, into, let's say someone, is at that point, they're on QuickBooks and they're ready to upgrade, to that functionality. Can you just give us, maybe the top 3, benefits to getting off, of that QuickBooks solution in terms of whether it's functionality or collaboration? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, I think it's both functionality and collaboration, where now you have the entire organization on a platform, back office to front office. The other thing I would tell you is if you are going to do this, I'd strongly recommend you think long and hard about how much history you want to bring over, because another thing about the cloud application is maybe you need to bring over transaction level detail for the last 90 days and balances for the rest. But as you start to go on, you may find you need to bring over more information. Well, guess what? Now you know how to use the system. You've been interacting with it. If you want to bring over 6 months worth of history, you can outsource that, if you will, to the entire organization and have people import certain bits and pieces of data such that it's getting into the system and it's not just one person putting the information in, uploading the information, ticking and tying the information. So another nice thing you can do with cloud. The other thing I would tell you is, start small. So if you have an organization of 100 people, think long and hard, do I need to buy 100 licenses right off the bat? In most cases, when you're implementing a cloud application, you're paying for it right off the bat. So maybe to start, if it takes you 90 days to implement, you might only want to buy 10 licenses to start, so you don't get charged for a full year or for licenses that effectively are not going to be used until you literally go live.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. With that, I'm going to close the Q&A session. I'd like to thank Tom Kelly for his valuable insights and his time. For those of you in the audience, if you'd like us to connect you with Tom Kelly, please indicate that on the survey. We'll invite you to take that. Will pop up just as soon as the webinar concludes. Tom is clearly a leader in his field and is an excellent source of information on today's topics. Thanks again to today's sponsors, NetSuite and Host Analytics. As a reminder for CPE credit, if you did not check the box to receive CPE credit on the way in, please send an email to twalsh@performative.com in order to receive your CPE certificate. Finally, I would like to thank the audience for your valuable time. We hope to see you at future Performative events and on performative.com. With that, I'd like to close the webinar for today. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.